So basically, what about the politics then, right? Up, there we go. Have you all heard of Amartya Sen before? No. Everyone? You're not. Very good. Right, so the politics. Now, what we also saw on that little graph in the beginning is that actually most food insecure areas are also suffering from chronic instability and conflict. This is incredibly clear. We see this very clear. We also see that most conflict areas become protracted. So, various areas where political instability and conflict re-emerge or become chronic are also the sites where food, lack of food becomes crisis-like, right? Here we are. I have it on internet, but it's basically the same. This is food insecurity at the extreme, right? So this is crisis. This is famine warning for particular regions in the world. And again, you see it's all in sub-Saharan Africa, with the exception of parts of Afghanistan, right? This is Afghanistan, right? Or do I need my glasses again? We see Afghanistan, we see Yemen, we see South Sudan, parts of Somalia or Somaliland, northeastern Nigeria, right? Boko Haram territory, civil war in South Sudan, the Yemen conflict. This is more drought related, but Somalia is never, since the 1980s, conflict-free or easily accessible, and Afghanistan. Some other areas that have a slightly different context. We could have a political story about that also. But here, what I want to talk about is, should we, in that SDG 2 understanding, make a more prominent, let's say, link towards armed conflict, towards political strife? So this is the prognosis for the medium term of the early warning food security network that most NGOs and the UN use in order to find out where their attention needs to go, right? So red is an emergency, purple is a full swing famine. That is not there at this very moment, but last year still there was a famine declaration for 4 countries that were actually the same areas. So this is something that is actually here. This is hunger, but not the hunger that SDG in its broadness tries to talk about. They also talk about hunger in the cities or people that have, they have food but not enough. This is a hunger that may kill, right? But in the graphics that I started with, this takes a predominant place. Now, this is Alex de Waal. He is one of my favorite anthropologists because he has been studying famine, well, not because, but he has been studying famine since the early 1980s, particularly in Darfur, in Sudan, and also other regions. And he just published this book in 2018. And what he does is he says, he is incredibly enthusiastic. He uses these graphs and he says, hunger is going down everywhere, with the exception of a slight rise in the past 2 years. But in the longer run, famines are becoming less and less and less likely. Famines, he means, as a result of the lack of food. Famines as the unavailability of food, of people that simply cannot reach food. He says the likeliest scenarios for famine in the foreseeable future are political crimes committed in error and fear. That's interesting, eh? It's not even committed in error, but also in fear. So a response that happens because people simply are fearful. Political leaders, read that, maybe may turn towards a political crime. In the context of political economic turbulence and armed conflict, including the long war on terror, authoritarian and chauvinist government, and counter-humanitarian ideologies. Counter-humanitarian ideologies. I'm not sure what that means, but I take it as some of the things we see now, like a receding, maybe a rising nationalism or whatever. So what he does, what he pinpoints, is the future of hunger is actually in those areas where we cannot go to do technology, where we cannot go to increase agriculture, where we cannot go to increase government's responsibilities in terms of human rights, because it's war, or because because outside interveners are not allowed, because of what kind of reasons, you can imagine, maybe religious strife or what so, if you want to have. So he says, it is all political. Hunger is not a technical thing, hunger is not an agricultural thing anymore, hunger is a political problem. And one of his seminal works is called Famine Crimes, in which he basically articulated the same. He studied the history of famine, and he showed, building on Amartya Sen, that in most regions, food crises, famines correlate with maybe drought or maybe disaster or crisis, but in the end, it is always an authority or a government or an outside actor that blocks an intervention, or that prevents people to go to another country to seek food, or that prevents emergency aid coming in. So we cannot go around that political thing, right? Right? So hence we need to talk about conflict. And hence we need to talk about aid and intervention. Now that's interesting. This very year, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 2417. And what that is a resolution that condemns the starving of civilians and unlawfully denying humanitarian access as part of warfare tactics. And what it does is basically pinpointing this. If we really want to solve, let's say, that last remaining crisis-like circumstance of a food deficiency that kills, right? Famine that kills, we need to hold political leaders accountable. In that sense, it builds on Sen again, because De Waal would also argue, like a responsible government in a responsible, democratic, I do not want to sort of point towards a particular political opinion, but in a responsible democratic country, a famine, as we have seen in Somalia 5 years ago, or last year in the countries I mentioned, or earlier in Ethiopia, or in Bangladesh and in Bengal and in India, and I'm sure you have pictures of famines in the recent past, will not be possible in our globalized time if we know what is out there, right? That people use phones and they can send messages out into the world. Basically, nobody needs to die, and if they do, it is intentional. That's his main sort of line of argument. Obviously, the crisis may be unexpected and so on and so forth, but what this resolution aims at is that, right, this case, this means, and this means, and this means, and this means that armed actors cause people not to be able to feed themselves. Even if there is enough agricultural produce in northern Uganda or in Kenya or in Ethiopia that could be shipped in, or we could fly it in from the US or from wherever. This means that some machinery of armed actors, political actors that fight, prevent doing that. So these people need not to die. This has nothing to do with a lack of food. This is all political, it's intent, hence a famine crime. Now, obviously, we already had resolutions like this, like the Geneva Conventions forbid starvation as a warfare tactic, but the Geneva Convention is what we call soft law. So, unless a powerful actor is willing to intervene, nobody can do something about it. So it's very, let's say, powerless. And this resolution is in a sense also soft law, but it's a level up. It's a little bit more strongly. In this case, the UN Security Council might, for instance, scale up towards R2P, the responsibility to protect, might actually use a stronger political pressure to hold leaders accountable, or maybe even send them to, if we then still have that, the International Criminal Court. So this is something that I think, I don't read this in line with most of the literature on SDG 2, but I think it should be part of it, right? Can we build new institutional frameworks to take care of, those pockets of chronic hunger, recurring patterns of famine that are directly related to conflict that is entrenched in societies.